Alan, do you think the scintillating remark, the judge's sarcasm, is reversible error?
Oh, no, not alone. I mean, if the judge continues to make remarks that denigrate one side or the other, then a court conceivably might look at that as a totality of the circumstances. But, you know, judges make cynical remarks all the time. He apologized. No harm, no foul.
Garbage in, garbage out. Chris, is it a strong enough defense to pretty impressive numbers?
Well, no, I don't think there's any real defense to these numbers. I think it's clear, it has been in the past, and it continues to remain clear, I think, that it's Simpson's blood at the crime scene. It's Simpson's blood leading away from the bodies. It's Simpson's blood and two other blood types in that Bronco, and two of the sources of those blood types in the Bronco are now deceased.
Alan, the blood is not the blood from her reference sample, says the scientist. How do you defend against that?
I'm not here to defend anything. That is very significant if it turns out to be true. I think somebody's going to have to explain the presence of EDTA on the blood found on the socks, EDTA that comes from the reference tube, but not from the human body. I know Chris is going to say that the FBI expert said there wasn't enough EDTA and maybe it came from somewhere else. But, and I suspect the defense, I don't have any information on this, will put on its own expert to counteract this surprising bit of evidence that the level of degradation was greater in the human body, directly from the human body, than in the tube, then in the sock itself. That sounds counterintuitive. I'm not going to call it mumbo-jumbo the way the judge described some other evidence, but it does sound suspicious, and I bet there's another side to that story.
Well, the defense in the criminal case, nor will they in this case, I imagine, ever establish or prove that the blood stains on those socks came from anyone's reference sample, Geraldo. The fact of the matter is that this blood is not planted. It was not planted. It is blood that O.J. Simpson tracked into his home and got onto his socks as he murdered Ron and Nicole.
Well, you don't know that. I mean, you don't know that any more than I know.
I absolutely do know that. I do know that.
This you are so biased. Scintillating even than what happened in that courtroom. We'll take our first break.
You are so caught up in winning that.
We shall return. Don't miss a moment. But as we went to commercial, Chris Darden of Southwestern University, the author of In Contempt, and Alan Dershowitz of Harvard University, the author of Reasonable Doubt, were going at it. Chris was saying that the defense never... Well, Chris, you pick it up.
Well, the defense never ever established or proved that, that any of this evidence was planted. And they never have and they never will. Let me tell you something. Not only is the quality of DNA in the sock different from the quality of DNA in Nicole's reference sample, but the quality of DNA in the Bundy blood drops and the quality of the DNA in the Bronco samples are also different from any reference sample.
Then you really messed it up at trial. And why didn't you introduce that evidence? Why is all this evidence coming out at the second trial?
That were discussed at trial and admitted at trial. These are issues and information that was discussed at trial and introduced at trial.
Every single media report that says this is new information is wrong, Chris, and you're right. Chris, you are fooling the listening public here. You screwed up at the trial. Didn't have the facts in front of you.
Did you read Hank Goldberg's book, Professor Dershowitz?
I'm talking about the transcript.
Did you read Professor Dershowitz?
You show me something in the transcript which shows her testifying.
Go read.
No, I'm reading the transcript.
Go read.
You show me something in the transcript which has this witness testifying that the blood in the sock was less degraded. You screwed up at the trial.
In this particular situation, you have the burden of proof, Professor Dershowitz. You disproved my allegation. You think that you can. You didn't disprove any of the others.
Chris, you're just lying, and you're misleading the public.
How dare you call me a liar?
You have many weeks on this show. I challenge you to bring the transcript next week and show us where in the transcript this witness testified the way she testified in this court. If you don't do it, Chris, admit you're a liar, Chris.
You've got blood on your hands, Alan Dershowitz, and you're a liar, and you're disingenuous, and so is the rest of your defense team.
I put a challenge to you, Chris.
Let me ask you a question.
Next week, you have to produce this transcript.
Here is a question. A more...
You're not my father.
All right, men. This is a different question. Chris, is it not likely, with the benefit of 2020 hindsight, that the mountain of evidence approach the first time around is apparently, if pundits are any indication, and of course we are all flawed, that this approach, if I was going to draw a metaphor, it's more like an arrow pointing at the heart of the defendant rather than a mountain of evidence trying to bury him, that this arrow might have been a more effective approach?
Geraldo, the plaintiff attorneys in this case, they have more than just 20/20 hindsight in their favor. We educated the jury. We educated the public about DNA. You don't need to educate juries with 4 days of testimony on the subtleties of DNA evidence and DNA analysis. Not anymore. Not after everyone in the country watched and heard and listened and read about
That's about
DNA
the stupidest
analysis.
thing I have ever heard any lawyer say, that you don't have to educate this jury because another jury heard about DNA. You think that this jury, you just said that this jury didn't have to be educated because another jury.
I think that most people in the public now have some understanding of DNA analysis.
Alan, you have to cop to at least that we are better informed, generally speaking. I don't remember consciously, except maybe with Scheck and the Innocence Project.
What would you know about juries anyway? When's the last time you actually appeared in front of one?
I have read more jury transcripts probably than any lawyer in America.
That's your problem. You just sit back in an office up in an Ivy Tower reading.
Yeah,
you ought to come down from the tower to the real world and see how trials are actually conducted.
Well, you're the one who has the experience of losing them, Chris.
And second guess, which is all that you do. And
Alan, would you address the question I asked to your colleague Christopher just a minute ago? This arrow pointing
Of course I think it's a much better way, and it's not that they learned from the great trial tactics of the first trial. The first trial is a classic of how not to try a case. It's going to be taught in law schools all over the country for generations, how not to try a murder case. And Chris Darden and his colleagues are going to be remembered as the lawyer who really messed up a case that possibly could have been won had it been done in a more refined way.
So what are you saying? Are you saying that we blew it and a guilty man got off? Is that what you're saying now? Are you finally conceding that O.J. Simpson is the man who killed these two people?
A strong case that professionally could have resulted in a hung jury or a conviction.
Are you willing to admit finally, Alan, that the evidence in this case is more than enough to establish O.J. Simpson as the murderer?
Talking about reading, if you had read, you want to listen now, if you had read, Chris, if you had read my book, you'd see that months after the trial, I wrote in the book, of course there was more than enough evidence to convict if it was truthful evidence. You failed because of your lack of credibility to convince the jury your lack of credibility.
Shall we take a credibility
poll?
Shall we put up 2,800 numbers at Dershowitz and have a credibility poll?
I'm happy to do it. You put on false witnesses.
You have no credibility.
You put on Van Adder and you put on
soul for a buck, and you will release a double murderer out into the public for a couple of bucks.
On this case than anybody else did, so don't start talking about who's making the bucks.
Guys, let's bring it back home. This evidence, let me take a different approach. Blazier, and I think he's an underrated attorney, frankly.
He's a terrific lawyer.
He may not have the most fiery courtroom style, but he is methodically precise, and he can wax emotional. For him, it's different than either of you guys, but he does have a bit of fire in his belly, and he is trying mightily, it seems. He is striving mightily to get this idea inculcated in this jury's head that it doesn't matter what the number is. It could be 1 in 20 zillion as long as the data is somehow flawed. For example, this point that was made a lot of the last time around, where do you get these statistics? What is your base to extrapolate these numbers? And the point coming back that only 2 African Americans did that work the last time around. Is that going to work this time around with a jury that is, objectively speaking, a better educated jury? Alan.
Well, it's not a better educated jury in the sense of it's not educated by what happened at the first trial. They may know what the letters DNA mean.
They're not educated by what happened at the first trial. Most of them have opinions and views about the credibility of the witnesses, about Simpson's guilt or innocence or culpability. Everyone in the country, Alan, knows about the Simpson case, and most people have some understanding of what the evidence was in that case. So, of course, they're better educated.
You're not supposed to decide a second case, on the basis of what you may have heard snippets of in the first case. Every case has to be tried independently. I do think that the evidence being presented this time around is being presented in a much more coherent manner, in a much wiser manner. Less is more.
But can garbage in, garbage out work given that?
Of course it can, depending on what the defense puts on in its case. Now we have to wait and see. Let's remember that at the criminal trial, when the prosecution was putting on its case, it seemed very strong. It seemed like a mountain of evidence. It then turned out to be a mountain range of evidence, with some evidence that was better, some that was worse, and in the end, the prosecution messed it up terribly by putting on two witnesses, Van Adder and Furman. We haven't seen Furman in this case, and we saw very little of Van Adder, to tell utterly incredible stories which the jury didn't believe. That tainted the rest of their evidence. If the plaintiffs are smart here, they won't do that.
And and if the jurors here are a little smarter than the last ones, they won't buy into this crock and ball that you defense attorneys throw at them.
We shall return. I've just been handed this bulletin. Christopher Darden and Alan Dershowitz have bought vacation property together in Florida. No, just kidding. Here is the evidence as the plaintiffs have so far presented it. They have a timeline slightly later than the prosecution in the criminal case. They have a cop, or several cops, who saw blood on the gate well before the sample was taken those weeks later to belie the allegation that it was planted. They've got an expert, one knife, one killer. They've got a witness, white Jeep-like vehicle fleeing the scene. They've got Nicole buying gloves like the ones found. They've got Simpson wearing gloves like the ones found. They've got Simpson wearing Bruno Maggi's shoes. They've got the cuts on Simpson's hand being possibly fingernail gouges. They've got the blood drops at Bundy matching Simpson. They've got the fibers on the gloves and knit cap matching Simpson's Bronco carpet fibers. They've got fibers on both gloves and knit cap matching Ron's shirt. They've got Nicole and Ron's hairs on the Rockingham glove. They've got a possible Simpson hair on Ron's shirt. They've got Nicole's blood now on Simpson's sock, and the sock blood does not match Nicole's reference sample. It seems, Chris, that the plaintiffs are doing pretty well.
I think the plaintiffs are doing better than pretty well. I think they're doing a great job, a fabulous job. And just about every item of evidence that you just mentioned or just listed was introduced into the criminal case. But
is it possible that in introducing, for example, the 3 DNA evidence, I opened the program, that was 3 weeks, those 3. Today it was 1 day, day and a half.
Well, I think it's nice to keep things as tight as possible, and that certainly is something that we attempted to do in our case, quite frankly. We aren't the ones that kept people on for days and days and days. Surely Robin Cotton was on 3 days, a little more than 3 days, educating the jury about DNA. But we're not the ones that dragged this trial out into a 9-month circuit.
Geraldo, I think you have an obligation to your
viewers. Alan, you're going to tell them my obligation right after this commercial break. Dershowitz, stay tuned. Alan was about to tell us what one of the duties incumbent on me is. Alan, it was?
Well, with due respect, Geraldo, I really do think when you have somebody like Chris telling the public that what went on at the first trial is exactly what went on at this trial, you should have a chart. You should have a chart. Just keep your mouth shut and let me finish.
Don't tell me when to shut up.
The public will decide what they heard.
I said.
Hey, Geraldo, are you going to let me answer this question?
Gentlemen,
Chris,
let's speak, colleagues.
Darden
Alan first and then Chris responds.
Is not telling the truth. And you should put up a chart, and in the chart you should show what was presented at the civil trial, what was presented at the criminal trial, what's different. Then you should have somebody like Vince Bugliosi, who has more experience than anybody, come on the show and tell Chris and tell me and tell you how to compare what's going on at the criminal trial is what's going on at the civil trial. So the public is not misled by being being fed self-serving information by a guy who screwed up the first trial, trying to explain that everything he did was right, and the only difference is the dumb jury. The last resort of an unsuccessful lawyer is to blame it on the jury, and that's all Chris knows how to do. Blame it on the jury.
Chris, a brief rebuttal.
No rebuttal.
No rebuttal. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan.
Okay.
By all means,
all right. Listen to the. Now, guys, I suspect you're going to be on the same side, so you better. I'm not going to answer the kiss and make up, but I'm sure you'll be on the same side for most of this.
No, we won't.
Listen to these figures. They were compiled by the Orlando Sentinel, a fine newspaper, Orlando, Florida. 1,000 traffic stops monitored on a Florida highway, captured on videotape. Black and Hispanic drivers make up only 5% of the drivers on this particular road. Those 5% accounted for more than 70% of all those drivers stopped and searched, and that's not all. The average stop for a driver of color took twice as long as the same procedure did for white drivers. Now,